These are hats or other products that are going to be, especially hats, are going to be worn all the time. They're going to be your go-to Saturday hat, whether you're going to brunch, whether you're going to take the kids to the soccer game.
Hi there. Welcome to the Connecting KC podcast. I'm Rachel Kilmer, also known as Rach the Realtor on the internet, where I love, connecting all things KC. I'm a metro area real estate agent, retired sports reporter, and mom, and probably too old to call myself a TikToker, but honestly, that's how we got here. You can learn more at www.rachtherealtorkc.com. But this show is all about introducing you to all of the movers and shakers, interesting people, heartfelt stories, and funny quirks that make this vibrant community home. So let's get right to it with today's episode of Connecting KC. Welcome into today's episode of Connecting Kansas City. I am honored to be joined by Garret Prather. He is currently the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at Sandlot Goods, which is Kansas City's only hat manufacturer. He focuses on establishing authentic relationships across different brands and industries as more individuals and companies throughout the country realize the immense value of well-designed, high-quality, USA manufactured products for their brands. Originally from Wichita, Kansas, he obtained a finance degree at KU and an MBA in international business at Rockhurst before moving to New York City, working in the innovation consulting and advertising industries, most notably at the New York Times, before moving back to Kansas City in 2020. When he isn't running around preaching the good word about the hats, he's running after 3 little kids, often failing, me too, but failing to keep up, and thankfully has a better half in his wife, Emily. And sometimes Garret finds time to read a book. I relate to that heavily, Garret. So thanks for being here today. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me on. This is fun.
Yeah, for sure. So I will admit I'm not overly familiar with the Sandlot, your company. And I was just looking at your website. It's like beautiful products. Tell me more about you guys, what you do, what your mission is, and like what makes you unique.
Definitely. So yeah, I think Sandlot, it's kind of, I always tell it about 3 different chapters. So chapter 1 is its founding in 2014 and leading up to the pandemic. Chad Hickman is our founder. Him and a couple others started it with leather making, primarily thanks to Cerner. So Cerner asked if they could make journals for people celebrating 5-year anniversaries at the company, handed him a check to do it. And he said, let's do this full time. And so they primarily were leather making. Did a little bit with bags, kind of when Herschel came about and really got first popular. But really sort of a small in the garage, had a small shop in the Crossroads company leading up to till the pandemic. Then when 2020 hit, that's when we were, if you remember, we were supposed to watch Netflix for 2 weeks and everything would go away, that kind of time period. Nobody really seemed to need a wallet then, and they quickly pivoted to mask making with that need there. So making cloth masks, jumped up to 65 people, running 3 shifts, even had take-home kits, sewing. And there was a lot of not only local, but across the U.S. where they were making masks for first responders and hospitals, but also corporations, things like that, just to try and get masks out when there was that shortage for a while. So the company ended up making 600,000 pieces of PPE, and that's that chapter 2 for the company. And that helped us understand and realize there's a lot of good sewers out there. This isn't a let's go on LinkedIn and post a job for somebody to sew kind of thing. And so there's a lot of word of mouth. There's a couple places where there's kind of not an apprenticeship necessarily model, but just a good teaching model, and then helping get them jobs outside of that. But it was, I think, a hard thing to suddenly accumulate that many good sewers. But the pandemic led us to that, and then also led us to realize we were not going to make masks full time. That was something that was temporary. It not only helped provide for the community, but it also kept people employed here. So from 65, kind of naturally went back down to the lower 20s as people returned to their normal jobs. And then we started making things that a lot of people were approaching us about. So can you make totes? Yep, sure, we can do that. Can you make pennants? Can you do drink sweaters, which is kind of it's the opposite of a koozie in a sense, where it's 100% wool, so it's biodegradable. So it's kind of just a fun, different take on how to keep your drink cool. And then finally, hats came about because Chad was looking to get Sandlot kind of hats. He thought, where and how can I get this? Had some pretty frustrating experiences, both with domestic hat manufacturer and abroad, trying to find somebody there. So I ended up doing can we do this? Because we're doing all these other soft goods. And that is what started chapter 3, chapter 2 being the pandemic and the mask making, chapter 3 of becoming a full-on hat company where we still make leather, we still do some of the other soft goods, but hat making has really taken off. And we've done hat making for about 3 years now. It started with Chad ordering machines, watching YouTube videos, people learning how to do it from that sense, and made some pretty bad hats at first, but that's what you do. And I firmly believe in kind of iterating in the field in that sense. We were iterating in the building and figuring out what we were doing. But now we really hit our stride probably in the last year and a half, and we just make a really nice hat now. So we do it from scratch. And we are one of the few domestic hat manufacturers. And that's a really tough business. And why a lot of people went abroad. I think there was a lot of that. Things moved abroad in the 90s. And you think of like American Needle, other companies that used to make hats domestically, and then they went abroad just due to cost savings. So for us, it's definitely swimming against the current. We start people at $15 an hour. If they're full-time, they get benefits. We're at about 40 people full-time and part-time. And so the cost of goods sold for us is going to be higher naturally because people are starting at $15 an hour. Whereas you're looking at other hat makers, they are not being paid that, whether they're in Mexico, whether they're in China, whether they're in Southeast Asia. So that's kind of the quick and easy story, I guess. It probably wasn't as quick as I originally thought I'd make it, but that's kind of where we're at now. So it's sort of this phase 3. We're 10 years old, but it's really kind of 3 years in this sort of startup feel still.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the prices I feel like are very comparable to any quality hat that you would expect. And you can tell the quality is there for sure. Do you guys sell online only? Are you in retailers? Kind of where can people find the product?
Yeah, good question. So we have our own standalone retail store that we opened last fall, and that's locally in Kansas City. So it's in Park Place, which is in Leawood, so 119th and Knoll. And then we're also in the Made in KC marketplaces. So that's the primary one on the plaza. We actually occupy the main booth. So right when you walk in there on the plaza, you're going to see a huge hat wall, and that's all Sandlot. And then we're also at Lee Summit and the Lenexa marketplace locations. And then there's a lot of wholesale that's going on. So one of my primary responsibilities is to establish relationships with wholesalers. So we're in Rally House, Shields, Dick's Sporting Goods. But we also have a lot of our local ones. So West Side Story was our first account, our first wholesale account. So we still have that as like a really fun thing that we have a lot of pride in. I mean, you look at them, they took off this last fall in terms of their national recognition with supplying the Swift family with some very authentic Chiefs gear. So there's a wide variety locally, and then we also offer custom. So all our products are available from a custom standpoint, but hats are the primary there as well. And that is across the U.S. as well as in Japan. Our Negro Leagues baseball collection is actually carried in Japan as well.
That's super cool. How many custom orders do you get? And do you get like what kind of people are ordering custom hats?
It's a good question. We get a lot of inquiries every week, and that has turned into a lot in all caps since the Taylor Swift green New Heights hat and all the fun that we've been having the past month with that. But we'll get a lot of inquiries. Some of it can be from local coffee shops all the way to corporations who want hats for their team members. It can really vary, and what we're making for them can also vary. So kind of the one that we're really proud of, and it's been really fun seeing them celebrate, is on the local level in Kansas City. J.E. Dunn is celebrating 100 years this year. And so what we did is made hats for them. We made over 5,000 hats that we then distributed across the U.S. to their employees that they were able to open up in January and have as part of the kickoff celebration. So it was a nice duck canvas hat, which that material kind of think Carharty. It's that we're all in the sort of workwear phase, and that's people like to pretend they drove a tractor to work, and here's my Carhartt kind of thing. I say that, and I'm wearing a Carhartt shirt. We made hats out of that, and then did a really nice wool applique of 1924 on the front with their logo on the side. And then actually had a custom tag on the back that said 100 years, had J.E. Dunn on it. So it was really kind of a like give it the full work sort of hat, which is really fun to do. It's amazing to see companies invest in these, because these are not cheap hats, but I think they firmly believe, and more people believe, that making high quality hats and other products are great because they're just gonna live longer out in the market. That's why I say we make products that are marketable. They're not promotional, They do promote, but they're not like here's something for a specific event. Then you might end up in your desk. You're not going to use that again kind of thing. These are hats or other products that are going to be, especially hats, are going to be worn all the time. They're going to be your go-to Saturday hat, whether you're going to brunch, whether you're going to take the kids to the soccer game, and so forth. So that's kind of on one end, and then the other end is making like a very cool branded. Here's like we work with Cafe Corazon on things at the local level as well, but also other small shops across the U.S. Kind of something that's brand specific and really goes well with kind of like what the values they have and kind of the message they're trying to send to.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. How difficult are the sports leagues to work with in terms of licensing? And what's that process been like?
Yeah, licensing has been pretty interesting. I think for us, there's been a lot of learnings, and it kind of goes with our whole thing. We are building this plane as we fly it. None of us have manufacturing backgrounds or things like that. And so when it comes to licensing and kind of getting to know and establish relationships with whether it's leagues or whether it's with the Dick's Sporting Goods of the world, it's challenging in a way. There's certain gatekeepers for all the leagues. There's a big, powerful brand protection, which totally understand kind of all this. None of this is surprising as we've learned it, and there's reasons for it. But it's been tough depending upon the league. So you look at some of them, there's license that you have to get across the entire league. So the NFL, Major League Baseball, you can't just get a local Royals license and make Royals hats, as fun as that would be, especially this season. And so that's where it's not something that we can just easily come knock on the door and say, hey, we make hats. Can we do this? But then there's different ways and other licenses that we hold. So on the collegiate side, it is a different story. There still are different challenges, and it depends upon what's available for each school. But we carry over 24 collegiate licenses. Our most notable ones are KU, K-State, Mizzou, Iowa. And that's kind of the Power 5 or Power 4. I don't know how to describe the conferences anymore, but yeah, Power something. That's where we do a lot of license and have really good SKUs on there. And then kind of two other really important ones. One, and they're both actually behind me here on the wall. So the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, outstanding, unique museum. We're really lucky to have it here in Kansas City. We carry license through them. So we license for all the teams that were part of the Negro Leagues. And so that's something that we do sell across the U.S. and I mentioned into Japan even. But then we also at the local level work on, for example, the Kansas City Heart. That's a Monarchs mark from the 1942 team is originally on their sleeve. And so we license that through them and do some fun styles with them, whether they're sports team colors or kind of different things. And then finally, the KC Current. So that's been awesome working with them. And I think anybody who hasn't thought about KC Current or hasn't been looking at the schedule or gone to a game this year in the local area, I don't know what you're doing, but you need to get that figured out. It's been really fun working with them for a couple of years now. And this year's really taken off with the stadium and how the team is doing on the field as well. Unbeaten as of this recording, not to age the podcast, but hopefully this unbeaten goes for a while. So we work with them, and not only do we do hats, but we do other products. We do stadium exclusives, but that's been a really popular collection as well.
Yeah, man, the Current is so cool. I went to this the first time a couple of weeks ago, and I had chills the whole time. So cool, and their brand is just impeccable. The colors and everything, so cool. And so, what a fun moment for Kansas City to have that here. So
it's fun, and then I think they really make everybody feel like they're a part of it. And I say that too, just from the local small companies as well. I mean, you see and look at a lot of the cool collaborations they're doing, with Made Mob, you see with Cherry, all these different styles and things. And it's a credit to the ownership. So the Longs and the Mahomes and really wanting to make this a part of the city from the start. And it allows the creativity. I think that's what's so cool when you look at all these different brands putting out licensed stuff. You see where their creative direction goes, and it's not all the same, and it shouldn't all be the same. That's boring. So that's, I think, a really another cool aspect of it is it's a unique colors and a unique situation where it's a professional team and there's a lot of local creativity that is encouraged. And so a lot of credit to everybody involved on that and making that a real thing.
Mm-hmm. How does Kansas City lend itself for a business like this to thrive? Because you mentioned a few other businesses that are kind of similar to what you guys do. And it seems like Kansas City welcomes more to the market like this because of the way that like Kansas Cityans love Kansas City and will slap a hat on that just says KC, even though it has nothing to do with our sports teams. Like, what's special about making these kinds of products here in Kansas City?
You know, it's interesting because it seems very unique for Kansas City and for us to be in Kansas City. Like, I don't know if a Sandlot could really thrive and survive in a lot of other cities around the U.S. Kansas Cityans are their biggest fans. It's a juxtaposition in the sense of the humble, nice Midwest folk, but huge fans of ourselves. That helps keep things alive. And I think even especially for us, like a big differentiator from any of the brands that I've mentioned is like we're manufacturing here. So we're doing it from start to finish, bringing in the raw materials for these hats. And even like the decorating the apparel, like we're actually decorating it. We're not just hiring it out. And so to do that requires a lot more personnel. It requires paychecks every 2 weeks. So that's where I think it's very unique in the Kansas City sense that all the Kansas City focused stuff is our big seller. And it is thanks to everybody in the local area. And even now we can say too, with the airport opening, I don't know who the individual or group that's responsible for really emphasizing that a lot of the airport vendors have to at least be local. But that has been an amazing experience as well, because we're in the 4 locations now in the airport, our product is, and you have all these people who are not Kansas Cityans buying this Kansas City stuff and kind of spreading it that way. So it's something, even as we've run recent campaigns for our Helvetica series across cities in the US, where we find the most success, it's kind of 2 things. It's either one where there's just so much saturation in the city, New York City, LA, SF, that you're going to hit that pride and get those hats. But really, it's amazing to see the other cities that I think are similar to Kansas City. You see Buffalo, Detroit, those cities that are going to be more of that mid-size, but they've got a little bit of that chip on their shoulder of that fierce pride. I think that's really cool to see. And that's, I think, also just where we're finding success in those areas as well.
Yeah. Well, you being from Wichita, I'm sure you've thought about this, but like, I feel like Wichita people from Wichita have just as much, if not more, pride in Wichita as Kansas City. Like the Wichita flag, like the keeper of the plains, like all of that. Like, I don't know. It's like this Midwestern thing of like, no one can talk crap on my town except for me, and I'm really proud of where I live. Like,
yeah, it's kind of a fun way to see how everyone has turned towards that sort of pride, or like how a way to show it. I mean, I think even I'm glad you mentioned the Wichita flag, so I can't seem like a homer and name dropping it, but my mom, Angie Prather, was one of the key figures of getting that flag pride out there in Wichita. There was a really great article, I think, in the Eagle a year or 2 ago about that, showing that she just really behind the scenes moved that up and made it a hometown pride. She ran the Instagram account, the social media accounts for a very long time as well. And it's fun to see that. It's something that growing up in Wichita wasn't a thing at all. I don't remember ever seeing the Wichita flag growing up. And now you can't miss it. It's everywhere. So there is something to say for Wichita, for Kansas City, for these other towns where to me, you see it as a lot. This is my just personal viewpoint, having lived in New York for a while and then coming back. You get a lot of these cities that are transplants. There is that certain pride there, but there's not the home roots that you can see in like a Philadelphia. You can see at Kansas City. Like you can see in these kind of towns where people are firmly established. They're raising their families. They're establishing their careers there. And there is a bit of a difference of that versus a Denver, where you're just getting a huge influx of people, which is great, but they each have their advantages and disadvantages. So to kind of go back to the origin of the question, sorry, I give really short answers, is when you think about like how and what can a Sandlot survive, I think Kansas City is one of the few environments that can allow a company like this to have a shot to make this a long-term thing.
I'm a real estate agent, so I help a lot of people move to Kansas City, and it's funny when they go to work the first day on a Friday in the fall and they'll be like, Rachel, you didn't tell me, like everyone wears red. Like, oh yeah, like I just am used to, I kind of forget sometimes that this isn't normal in other places.
Yeah. I think you need to have like a Kansas City starter pack. You see all those jokes that for anything like that. And I've seen it for Kansas City specifically, but yeah, you're gonna need to start providing that as one of the move-in gifts. And I think that's kind of one of the exciting things too about Kansas City is seeing boomerangs such as myself who moved here after KU and spent a few years before going to New York, but then others who are not from Kansas City but are moving here. There's just a ton of momentum here. And whether you are really into sports or not. I think that's been a key catalyst when you look at the draft, when you look at the World Cup that's coming up, when you look at the current, when you look at the dynasty that we have with the Chiefs, there's momentum that can be gained from that helps everybody. And it's becoming even more and more. And I've seen it whenever I would come back and then finally move back. There's just a lot of momentum here and it's exciting. And even yesterday I was at an event that was really promoting, there's something called Back to KC that KC Rise Fund has really pushed for at the local level, and just kind of telling people that might be interested, like, hey, you know, is there something in for me to move to Kansas City, whether it's coming back or they're like the spouse of somebody who's from Kansas City, to kind of show and just attest, like, this is a great place to be. It's a big city, small town where you can establish a great network and really get to know people, and people like genuinely want to work together on things. So that's what I think is like a fun, contagious part about it all.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, last two questions for you. I ask everyone that comes on the podcast. The first one is, what is a great meal that you've had out and about recently in Kansas City?
Okay. Well, you're asking somebody with a 5, 3, and 1-year-old what a great meal is. So my answer could be a meal that doesn't have yelling, any establishment that doesn't have people screaming and just agree to eat their food. So there's a lot like that. I'm a really big fan of Bamboo Pennies, and that's over there in Park Place where the Sandlot store is. Man, that place is awesome. That's just really great Thai food. So that's going to be my shout out on a good place to eat. But there's a lot. I think that's another thing I would say, not to sound like a hoity-toity East Coaster, but I spent my time in New York, and one of the great things about New York is all of the amazing food. But there's so much of that here now versus when I left and then I came back. And so, man, the amount of restaurants and great food and authentic is, I don't know if there's ever been a greater time than Kansas City than there is now, just great different restaurants that are out there.
Yeah, it's so slept on as a food scene. But as a parent of a 4-year-old, I definitely thought you were going to say Fritz's. So I thought that's where we're going.
You know, I've done that a few times, and it's not bad, but it's also, you know, there's a few other things out there too.
You're not there for the food. You're there to entertain your kid for an hour.
Yeah, they have a wonderful time. So that honestly should be how I'm grading it. There's a lot less yelling. There's a lot more food eating at Fritz's. So maybe that should be the shout out.
Exactly. Okay, last question is, where can people find you? Where can they find more information about the Sandlot? Where can they connect with you online?
Yeah, so sandlotgoods.com is an easy way to find us from your phone. But we are, if you're in the Kansas City area, we are local, and our factory is local. We're right on Southwest Boulevard. So we're close to the roastery. We're close to Boulevard Brewery. We have a small factory store when you walk in, but it's a good excuse to come shop for a hat, shop for something, and you can actually see everything being made. So the sewers are all out there. Our office is right here. So I'm about 20 feet away from where everybody's sewing right now. So come find us locally there. Find us at our retail store down south in Park Place, but then also in the Made in KC marketplaces. And then go to any of those big box retailers and look for our brand. And you might end up seeing us where you don't find us, or you don't expect us, where some of these other companies that you're shopping, you might see a custom hat or things, and that's probably going to be us as well.
Yeah, super cool. Love it. Garret, thank you for taking the time to be here today. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks, Rachel. I really enjoyed it. Cheers.
Yep. Guys, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. Bye.